Madam Speaker, in 2015, the minister's government promised to run modest deficits that would fund unprecedented infrastructure spending and would allow the budget to balance itself, as they put it. But instead, they created a structural deficit for 10 years and 10 years later have broken the same promise that they made back in 2015 about infrastructure. So now, tonight, perhaps this will be the night where the minister will finally answer this question and tell me in what year the budget will be balanced.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Chair, it's a real pleasure to be spending the whole evening with my colleagues. My colleague will be happy to learn, because I know he will be very interested, that we made generational investments, Madam Chair, in infrastructure, in housing, in productivity and innovation. And the Plan of Canada has been around by the International Monetary Fund as really the way forward in order to create growth. So, Madam Chair, I'm sure my colleague tonight will be very happy to know that the country is going to be building the strongest economy in the G7 and that we have made generational investment in infrastructure.
Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
So the minister has not answered the question, and he has just repeated the same promise that they have been breaking since 2015. Canada's current interest cost for this year is $54 billion. Is that amount more or less than the current federal health transfer?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Chair, my colleague will be happy to learn, because tonight is a learning exercise, I think, for my colleagues, that in fact the percentage, when you look at the debt charge of Canada, actually they're pretty low by historical standard, Madam Chair. They're close to about 2%, and if you look at the historical figures in 1990s, they were around 6%. So I would say that Canada is in a very strong fiscal position.
Calgary-Crowfoot.
Canadians going to learn anything tonight, Madam Speaker, if the minister won't answer any questions. Interest on Canada's debt is projected to rise by 50%, from $54 billion to $81 billion in 2030-31. Is that more than future health transfers are budgeted?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Madam Chair, as I said, it's going to be interesting for Canadians to learn that the projected debt charge as a percentage of GDP for 26-27 will be 1.7%, and that is far below the peak of 6.5% Canadians faced in the 1990s, Madam Chair. So what I'm saying is that we're on a very solid fiscal track.
Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
So another non-answer. So the per-family debt charge is about $3,400 right now in this year. How much does he think a Canadian family can afford to spend on interest on the federal debt?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair, again, it's going to be a very interesting evening. I look forward to the question, because in fact, what I was saying is that the debt charge as a percent of GDP are not only lower than they were in the 1990s, but they are below the historical average of 40 years, Madam Chair, which was 3.2%. So I think the member tonight should be happy to see that the country is on a very solid fiscal track.
Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
Madam Speaker, they've been claiming for years that there would be declining debt to GDP, but there is not. The debt to GDP ratio is rising. Is the debt to GDP is it higher this year than last year, yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
The member will be pleased to hear that the International Monetary Fund just stated that Canada has the strongest fiscal position of the G7. Actually, Madam Chair, we have the second fastest growth in the G7. So I'm sure that my colleague will be happy to report to his constituent that the country is on a good fiscal track.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
The answer is the debt to GDP ratio went up, even though that's the fiscal anchor that they've been claiming for most of the last 10 years. So they've broken their fiscal anchor. How much debt per household how much interest per household does he think Canadian families can afford for his debt?
The Honourable Minister.
Madam Chair, I'll be happy to remind my colleague is a learned member of this House. We have two fiscal anchors. One is a declining deficit to GDP, and the other one is to balance the operating budget with revenues by 28-29. Those are the two fiscal anchors of the Government of Canada.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Crowfoot.
So those are new ones. He's discharged and cut loose every anchor that they've assigned for themselves. What's going to be their new fiscal anchor they make up next year when this fiscal anchor gets cut loose like so many before it?
The Honourable Minister, 10 seconds.
Madam Chair, again, in the spirit of teaching my colleagues some of the facts, let me quote Kevin Page that said our target of balancing operating budget in 28-29 will put more constraints on the government that with fiscal rules tied to change in the size of the economy. This is coming from Kevin Page, Madam Chair.